Hey everybody, I'm going to show you just some more alternatives to projects. I know there's a big demonstration on how to pinch build, and I want you to feel comfortable making anything that you want to make. But you know, just to give you some different ideas. So I thought I would make some little things, you know, maybe like a little cup or something. When you pinch build things, they're going to be a little bit more organic, which is, you know, kind of code for rough in some circumstances. But they don't always have to be this enclosed form like I show you in that video. You know, you can just think about making like little cups or little bowls or things like that. Like you could do a set of something. It's a great way to make little like candle holders or funky little flower pots, things like that. But you just basically you start with your little ball of clay and you push your thumb in there and then you're pinching that clay to start getting the shape you want. But also what you have to do is think about the thickness of the clay. We don't want it to be too thick. You know, if you're making something like a cup and you plan to use it, you don't want it to be a big, thick, heavy cup. You want the walls to be thin so it's nice and light. If you're making like a planter or something like that, it could be thicker. You really don't want the clay to be, you know, more than about, I don't know, an inch thick would be pushing it. I would stick with about a half an inch, quarter or 3/4 of an inch at the most, just to play it safe. I typically make things pretty darn thin. But it's all about just guiding that clay. Giving it a little pinch here and there to squeeze the clay in the direction you want it to go. And the one thing you're going to discover very quickly, and I may have talked about this in other videos, it's all trial and error. You might have to do this a couple of times and it'll fail, and then you just wedge that clay back into a ball and you try again. Trial and error, it's a big part of the art making process. And then to try and kind of refine the shape a little bit, I use the curve of my thumb and I push that into the clay. And that curve gets transferred into the clay. So I start to get more of that curved shape that I want. In the top here, I can just start to smooth that down just with my fingers. I start to have a little bowl shape. And then I can take some clay. So traditionally, like if I was making a coffee cup or something like that, it would have a ring of clay right here. And that is made, like if you're working on the potter's wheel, that's made through a process that's done on the wheel, which you'll see in future videos. But what we can do here is we can just roll out a coil. Table's got a little dry clay on it. It's sucking the moisture right out of my clay here. so I don't know, somewhere in there. Bring those ends together. And remember that anytime you attach one piece of clay to another, you have to score it. Put some slip on there. Otherwise, it is not likely to stay together very well. And then I need to score all this. And about where I think it's gonna go, what I'm gonna do, just so I know where I'm scoring the bottom of this without hacking it all to pieces, I'm going to use, there you are, my needle tool. And I'm just gonna draw a little, kind of a guideline. I didn't quite make it all the way around, but I pretty much know where it's at. Put some slip on there. Put my piece in place. Push that down a little bit. And then what I also like to do is something that I refer to as stitching. But I'm just gonna blend all the way around. And just get that clay all mixed together. So the clay won't stay on there unless you combine it together somehow. So you have to make sure that you use a little slip and scoring, do a little blending, and when that clay dries and then gets fired, that'll all be permanently attached on there. So there's the main part of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of using my brush that I use for slip and everything. I'm just smoothing it all down a little bit so that all my little blending marks start to disappear. And there'll be a lot more finishing that I'll have to do as I go here. So what my next step then is I'm gonna let this sit and I'm gonna let it dry for a little bit. And then I will come back in and work with it when the clay sits up a little bit, dries a little bit. So I'll probably let it sit here for maybe an hour, half hour. I just have to keep an eye on it. If it's a really well ventilated space that you're working in, your clay will dry much faster. If it's an enclosed space, no air movement, the clay will stay wet for a long time. Like my home studio space is in my garage. And there is not a lot of airflow through my garage unless I open up all the doors. So I can actually leave something sitting for hours and hours and the clay barely dries. So it's kind of, you just have to do it and babysit it and check on it once in a while and see the progress. When I'll work on this again is when the clay feels stiffer. It doesn't feel so soft. Like right now, the clay is really soft. I can just push my finger right into it. So when that clay becomes firmer where it's harder to push my finger into it, I'll start working on it again then. If I was going to manipulate the shape of this quite a bit, like, you know, maybe change the shape dramatically, like something like that, I would have to do that now while this clay is still very soft, because I won't be able to do that later. Okay?